right, man. Well, welcome to the Honest to God pod.
All right, awesome. Good to be here.
First episode. I don't even know what I'm doing, but it's all good. But yeah, I just thought this would be really interesting and impactful because I know that just knowing you for these few years, like I really felt
many
like,
years, man. I don't know, it's probably like 20 years now.
It's hard to say, like many. Yeah, I guess 20 years. That's crazy.
Probably.
I forget how old I am, I guess. But how for me knowing you, I think today this topic of being about sexual brokenness and things like this and wholeness. Yeah. I know that for the longest time growing up, probably till I was about 19, 20, there were areas in my life that I kept secret and I felt like no one talked about. And I felt like you were the only one talking about these things. So it was really helpful for me because I felt like there was no one that would understand and no one that would feel like they would be able to feel safe to say certain things. But I think that you made it safe to say a lot of the struggles that a lot of people go through that I went through. I'm still struggling with as well. So yeah, just really thankful and just thought that this episode would be really good to kind of go into that. And especially because my channel is called Honest to God, I just think like there's a lot of things that people brush over or they don't really.
This is probably an area where people aren't too honest to God or don't know what that looks like or what that's supposed to.
Yeah, like a lot of half-truths or glossing over and stuff. And I just really want to get into it. And I think that, you're that person that would be able to do that just to be real about it. So that's kind of my goal for today. And I'm hopeful that it would help others as much as a lot of these conversations have helped me. So I'm wondering if you could just like give me a little bit of your background, and then I'll probably fill in some of the things that you kind of missed or.
Sure. Yeah, like my own background with like sexual brokenness.
Yeah,
in particular.
And what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I kind of think back, the short story would be, sexual brokenness really came into my life when I was around 12, and it was during a time of trauma in my life where my oldest brother died. My oldest brother was 17 and died in a swimming accident. And that just like devastated me personally, emotionally, kind of at all levels. And coming out of that trauma or through that trauma, really pornography and lust and escape became kind of my medication to deal with that particular trauma in my life, but then ended up porn became the thing that I just turned to start to medicate kind of everything in my life from that point on. And so that just became a pattern for my adolescence. I mean, 12 years old, heading into puberty, all of my growing desires and struggles with my identity, struggles with relationships, all of that stuff got funneled into pornography. And so developing long-standing habits of turning to pornography to meet all kinds of needs. And that just persisted for years and years and years. And so it was a pattern that was really hard to break. And when I began to try to change it, I found how difficult it was. And that kind of began my journey of trying to understand like what is going on for me and what's going on with sexual addiction, pornography addiction. And that's been a big part of my own journey and spiritual journey.
When you talk about like trying to find help and kind of like see, I guess like how to get out of the addiction, like what kind of helped you in that, or like who helped you? What were some of those processes?
I mean, trying to think back in terms of like what was helpful for me. And very similar to you, I barely heard anybody ever talk about it. And so just even hearing it mentioned was helpful because for myself, and I think for a lot of people, you tend to think it's just you that's struggling with it. When people don't talk about it, when people aren't talking about it as something that is common amongst people, you just begin to assume like it's just me. And when you begin to think that, then you think like there's something particularly screwed up about me. If I'm struggling with this so persistently and it seems like nobody else is, then that's where shame kicks in. And shame is so connected to addiction because you think there's something wrong with me. I can't share this. There's something especially broken about me. And that keeps it hidden even more. And so because that's such a big part of this addiction, that's why there's such a need to speak about it, because I knew for myself growing up, I never heard about it. And so I was just lost in myself. I was lost just thinking like, why can't it just get better? Like, what's wrong with me? God, just take this away. And so because I didn't understand it, my my understanding of how to break free from it, I didn't have clarity about it because nobody was talking about it really. And so my earliest attempts were just, like trying to be spiritual. Like I just thought like, this is not spiritual. So how do I be more spiritual? And kind of becoming like hyper spiritual, trying to defeat this, which, there were good aspects of that, like learning how to pray, learning how to confess my sin to God, all those kinds of things. But there was so much I needed to learn that just took me years of kind of unpacking to really understand my addiction. I can get into it a bit more.
Yeah, maybe like what's one thing that really, even a practical kind of thing that.
Yeah, I mean, a practical thing would be like very much like, learning how to listen to my own heart was key in all this. What I began to understand over years was that there's a reason why I turned to pornography. It doesn't just come out of nowhere, right? And it's one of the first questions I ask people to get an understanding of how self-aware they are. It's like, why do you think you do this? And some people are able to connect the dots. They're like, I think sometimes like I'm lonely, or sometimes I don't feel good about myself, or sometimes I do it when I'm bored. And, they can make some of the connections, but that's such an important part of this is, why do I do this? Like, what's at the core of this? And I think this is what Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He said, lust begins in the heart. So what's going on in your own heart? Do you even know your heart? And so for me, practices of coming to understand my own heart, my feelings, my emotions, my desires, that was and continues to be absolutely core in the struggle with pornography addiction, because pornography addiction is medicating oftentimes what I feel inside. It's trying to escape from what I feel inside. It has nothing to do with sex at core. It's 95% of porn addiction is about emotional regulation. It's about how do I deal with what's going on inside of me. Immature ways of dealing with what's inside of me. And so practices that actually help me to reflect on my own feelings, my own heart, my desires, things like journaling, things like silence and solitude, to really confront what's actually in my heart. Because like Jesus said, lust begins in the heart. And so you have to develop practices of self-awareness, of coming to quiet, of coming to know, what am I even thinking and feeling? I mean, honestly, if people are able to do that, I don't want to put percentages, but that's like 85, 90% of the battle. If you can't do that, you're probably not going to overcome sexual brokenness.
Yeah. So I think like when you said, what is the reason why people go to it? I think a lot of people would say like, they're bored, they're horny.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know. Well, I think those are some of the big ones, right?
Like most people can have like kind of like a vague understanding, but it doesn't get specific enough. Like they're not paying attention to their life specific enough. So by the time they start to really struggle with lust or struggle with temptation, it's already morphed from something else, like the core reason. So for example, like let's say I'm just, I've had a bad sleep, so I'm tired. My boss criticized me yesterday, so I'm not feeling good about myself. I've got some financial stress. Those are things that could be going on in the background. And because of the buildup of that, maybe now I'm very susceptible to sexual temptation to escape those things, right? But if I'm not paying attention to those emotional things in my life, all of a sudden, all I think is I'm just struggling with lust, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, oh, this is a sexual thing now. But really, this is the sexualization of my needs. This is how I'm using sex to medicate all these other things. And so we got to kind of take a few steps back and say, why am I feeling this? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's because I've had bad sleep the last 2 days. There's a physical component. Oh, it's because my boss was criticizing me and I don't feel good about myself. So there's this emotional, psychological component. Or it's, there's financial stress. So there's multiple things that are happening that are deeply affecting me at an emotional level and at an identity level. And now it's morphed into struggling with lust because that's my escape. But it really at core has nothing to do with sex or lust. It's about these other things. But most people don't have attentive lives or reflective lives to even pay attention to those other emotional kinds of things. And, this was really shown to me like, two of the first earliest stories in scripture. One is, story of Cain and Abel, right? Which is really the first story that's showing the manifestation of sin in humanity. And this is where Cain, his offering wasn't accepted by God. And it says his countenance fell, meaning he felt emotionally bad. There was something that he wasn't feeling good about himself, right? And then God said to him, why? First of all, asking, why has your face fallen? So like, reflect, why are you feeling this way? Then he said, you have a choice. If you choose good, things will go well. If you choose the other way, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to master you. So here we see the introduction of the mastery of sin over your life. And it's really about how you deal with your emotional life. What are you going to choose to do when you feel bad? There's a good way to deal with your emotions, but there's another way in which sin is ready to pounce on you. And it's about what you're doing with your emotional life. You see the same story in Jacob and Esau, another story of brothers, where Esau is hungry, he's tired, and he gives away his birthright for a meal. Meaning he's throwing away all of these things because he just has this need to satiate himself with something. And there again, it's making a bad choice out of legitimate need. I have a legitimate need for rest, for food, and yet I'm choosing a false way to kind of meet that. And so it's very practical in many ways when you think about it. Like, these are stories that are talking about making very bad choices out of legitimate need, right? I have these healthy needs actually, but I'm choosing to deal with them in unhealthy ways. And that's the core of a lot of sexual addiction for people is I've never learned how to deal with my emotional life. Nobody's taught me, nobody's modeled for me how to have compassion on myself. We just shove it away. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves just so drawn to pornography addiction, porn, lust, losing myself and all that kind of stuff. When it's really about how do I pay attention to my heart? How do I care for myself? That's a huge issue in pornography addiction.
So like when you say emotional regulation, is that kind of like proactive and as approach to be preventative, or is it when something happens, then you know how to like deal with?
It's both. It's kind of like car maintenance, right? Like you should know your vehicle enough to know when, according to schedule, you should be doing things so that it runs properly. Yep. And so there's a preventative aspect to maintaining your car, so to speak, maintaining your heart, maintaining like, how am I doing internally? But then there's signs that begin to appear when you haven't been paying attention. Your engine light will go off, right? Your car will be burning oil or whatever. There's different kinds of signs that are going to say, okay, you're really not doing well. And so there can be those signs that you have to pay attention to as well and say, I need to take a step back and deal with my emotional life, or there's things that are going on for me that I need to attend to. And oftentimes lust is really it's that engine light saying, there's something going on. There's a reason why you're wanting to escape from your life into this. There's a reason why you're so drawn towards temptation. What are you running away from? And it's kind of like that engine light saying, slow down, reflect on your life. Like, what is going on? Right. And that's something that as addicts, you need to begin to pay attention to. Like, what are these signs? So you need to attend to your emotional life, both preventatively, like in terms of just, keep your engine running smooth, right? Deal with your emotions, deal with difficulties in your life, deal with the relational problems that you have with people. If you're sad, process that, journal about that, understand what you're feeling and why. But it's also kind of, so it's both, you got to deal with it preventatively, but also kind of in the moment, you got to deal with it.
When you say like journaling a lot, do you think that's one of the good ways for emotional regulation? Are there other things that you could do?
I mean, journaling is big for me. I've been journaling for, 20 plus years.
Every day?
Not every day.
Okay.
Kind of when I need to. Like there's a lot of people say about journaling, when you write it out, in writing things out, you can articulate it more clearly to yourself. It's almost like I have these vague feelings in my heart that then when I actually have to write it out, I know specifically what it is, right? And so it's almost like it's a way of self-reflection that I have clarity about my own soul as I journal. A lot of people struggle with journaling or don't like to do it or don't want to get into the process of it. So there's other ways to kind of do it. I mean, you can go for a walk without, earbuds in your ear and give it time, and you'll begin to just ruminate on what's going on in my life, and how do I feel about things? How have relationships been going? How has my day gone? So there's other ways to kind of reflect on your life, to pay attention to what's going on inside. And I mean, people just got to figure out what works for them.
Is it kind of like putting language to it, being aware of your emotions? Is that what helps the emotions? Or is there something else that would help like soothe the emotions?
Like just being aware of your emotions is huge. Like that step in and of itself is helpful, because then you have an understanding of what's going on. But that in and of itself, at times that in and of itself may help you, to just say like, oh, I'm feeling bad because, A, B, and C, and then that kind of grounds you in the present, right? And that can be all that you need to kind of ground you and not kind of escape into lust and porn or fantasy. But at the same time, that also doesn't just knowing that you need comfort doesn't bring you comfort, right? And so oftentimes you'll become aware of things and you need to actually meet that need then, like, oh, I'm feeling this way. I need to talk to somebody about it. I need to tell somebody about what I'm feeling and actually receive that comfort or understanding from somebody. And so the awareness is the first piece, and then meeting that need is the second piece. So there's one thing for me to recognize: I'm stressed out. I feel spent. I've been overworking. Just that awareness isn't all of a sudden going to bring my body rest. It's like, oh, I need to make a choice now to go to the hot tub and rest. I'm going to go or I'm going to not work for half a day and let my mind do something else, right? So there's an awareness piece, and then there's the action to actually begin to meet that need.
So like making those healthy choices to comfort yourself through those emotions.
Yeah. And that's something, again, that addicts need to learn, right? Like for addicts, the reality is their addiction or porn addiction is the way that they meet their needs. It's the only thing that they know how to do. They either, watch TV or go on their phone or look at porn. And it's like, okay, can you learn some basic ways of meeting your own needs? And again, this goes back to our family of origin and childhood. Who helped you to process your own emotions? In your family, did your parents talk to you about your emotions? Did your parents model for you healthy ways of dealing with your emotions? And for many of us, we just never learned any of those tools. We don't know what to do. All we've done is drown ourselves in media, in music, in entertainment, and something to distract us. We've never learned, how do I sit down? How do I go for a walk? How do I deal with what's going on inside? How do I talk to somebody about this? We have no tools to kind of deal with our emotional life. And so we just shove it away. We ignore it. And then we have these addictions continue to pop up. So a big part of the recovery process is, how do I have healthy ways of dealing with my emotions?
What are some of the things that you do in a way of like being reactive? Say you see something and you're tempted and you're like, okay, I realize that this is drawing me towards this.
Yeah.
Now I need to find a way to regulate my emotions. What would you do actually?
Yeah, I mean, so we kind of talked about the need to acknowledge your emotions first. And so sometimes it would be to journal or to be like, what's going on for me? To just ask that basic question, like, okay, why am I drawn to this? Accountability is a big part of that, where I can actually reach out to somebody and say like, hey, I'm struggling right now, or I'm wrestling with temptation. Can you pray for me? Oftentimes actually, that process of engaging accountability that way kind of helps me to understand what's going on, because the very fact that I'm stopping and reaching out helps to bring kind of clarity to my situation. Like, oh, I'm in a vulnerable place. I'm actually feeling weak. Why? Pay attention, as opposed to just moving on in life and just saying, oh, I just hope it'll go away. Or and so actually grounding myself sometimes by reflective experiences or reflective exercises, like journaling, like slowing, like just taking 5 minutes sometimes. I mean, this is something that most people can do. Like when you're going somewhere in your car, like stop, and before you go to your next thing, take 5 minutes to sit in your car in silence. Reflect on what's going on for you internally. Like those kinds of practices help to ground you. And then reaching out to somebody, also just brings to mind, like, what is going on for me? What's been going through my head? What am I feeling right now? Those are some of the main tools that are like very easy to use, like right away, about how do I ground myself emotionally.
How come, I think some people would often think, especially if they're married or they have a partner or whatever it is, like, if I'm feeling tempted towards porn, I'm going to have sex. But how come that won't really help someone?
Yeah. No, and that's a very natural conclusion, right? People think, well, I'm tempted towards lust. If I just have sex, it'll go away. A lot of people assume that about marriage. I've been struggling with porn my whole life, but once I get married, it'll go away. And lo and behold, it doesn't. And the reason why it doesn't is because that's not the actual itch. Like, having sex is not the actual itch, right? Again, if sexual addiction is about emotional regulation, how I deal with my emotional life, when you have sex with somebody or you're with your spouse, great experience, but that doesn't all of a sudden erase all the reasons why you're feeling stressed out in life. Those things are all sitting there waiting for you after you have sex. So you're still needing to deal with these realities in your life. Like, I feel bad about myself. I'm feeling insecure, whatever. I'm feeling overwhelmed in life. Those things are all waiting for you, right? Yeah. And so just because you have sex, it doesn't negate those things. And those are the reasons why you're struggling with pornography. Those are the reasons why you're wanting to escape. Those are the reasons why you think, I just want to have sex because that'll make these things go away. It's not going to make those things go away, right? Because sexual addiction has very little to do with sex. It's the way you're trying to medicate your emotional life. It's the way you're trying to escape your emotional life. And sex is not going to make those things go away. So those things are just staring at you, waiting after you have sex. And it's like, I still have to deal with my actual life. I still have to deal with my relational problems. I still have to deal with the stress from work. I still have to deal with, all my inner pain from my past that I refuse to deal with. Like, all that stuff's still there, right? Yeah. Sex doesn't just make it go away, which is why it's not the solution.
Would you say like therapy or counseling would help as well? Or
absolutely. I mean, we've all got stuff in our past, right? We've all got stuff that, brings us pain, that have brought us hardship. And I think everybody, not saying that everybody's got to do therapy, but, we all have to reconcile with our past, right? And our past affects us. It affects how we feel, affects how we think about ourselves. And for many sex addicts, porn addicts, there are roots in your past. And so you have to actually take time to address that. I haven't met a single person who's like, I struggle with sexual addiction, but has nothing to do with my past. Give me a break, right? Right? Because we're talking about deeply entrenched ways we deal with our emotional life. And that usually has roots then in our past. It has roots in our family of origin. It has roots in, like, why are we so immature with our emotional life? Mm-hmm. Why have I learned to run away from reality? Well, for all of us, it's probably our past. It's probably our family of origin. It's probably the way we were raised what was the emotional climate in our home, right? It's very important for a sex addict to ask that question. What was the emotional climate in my home? And how does that affect how I deal with my emotional life now? Huge question in terms of sexual addiction, right? And if somebody can't answer that, it's like, man, you're very clueless about what's going on in your own heart. It's going to be very difficult for you to overcome sexual addiction if you can't even ask that question. Right? It means you don't know yourself. You're not willing to do the work of knowing what's going on inside.
You've talked to a lot of ministry leaders, talked to a lot of pastors about this kind of issue. What percentage would you say of those pastors do you think struggle with some kind of like porn addiction or casual encounters or infidelity?
What percentage of pastors?
Yeah, like out of 100%, like when you think about it.
Honestly, I would say it's rare that I've talked to a pastor about these issues who said, I've never dealt with those issues. I'm trying to think of even one person who's said that. So most pastors that I've talked to directly about this, would acknowledge struggling to some degree with pornography, either presently or in their past in their life, for sure. Like everybody. I think sexual brokenness and things like pornography addiction are so prevalent. Right there, I think I heard again recently that I think 30% of everything on the internet is pornography. 30% of everything So you think about how much content there is, how many YouTube videos, how much Instagram, how much sports, how much movies, how much whatever. 30% of everything that's online is pornography. That's an insane amount of content.
Mm.
And people are accessing that, right? So, for me, it doesn't surprise me that people struggle with pornography. I think it's okay. Like, yeah, you're a human being living in this modern world with access to technology. That makes sense that you struggle with pornography.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's kind of how I connect the dots now. It's not a surprise like, oh, you struggle with pornography. It's like, oh, like you're a human that has desires that also has a phone. Like, we're wired to be attracted to beauty and intimacy. So it makes sense that along the way, somehow you've stumbled onto pornography and that somehow grabbed a hold of you because we're actually wired for that. Now, hopefully you've been able to untangle some of that and see where that's gone wrong, where the desires have become distorted. Hopefully that's happened at some point. But it doesn't surprise me that people get there. We're human and we live in a fallen world with lots of opportunities, right? Our minds are wired to be excited about beautiful things and intimate things.
Yeah. How would you say that relates to lust? Or do you see that kind of connection? Or
the connection between
sexual brokenness, addiction, porn addiction, and lust? Because I feel like porn addiction is one degree of sexual brokenness and this desire, like this lustful desires. Because you can not watch porn, but still have these lustful desires that you entertain, per se. Yeah, that similar escape, similar addiction, but just looks better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I hear the word like lust, it's a bit broader than porn addiction. Like porn addiction is people talk about especially online porn addiction as they used to talk about this. They don't say it much anymore, but they talk about as the crack cocaine of sexual addiction. So sexual addiction is broad. Lust is very broad, right? Like I have a distortion of love, right? Love is about giving myself to another giving themselves to me in freedom and respect. Lust is this distortion of that. And then there's sexual brokenness, and then there's porn addiction. Porn addiction is the crack cocaine because people used to say the 3 A's. I don't hear this a ton anymore, but it's anonymous, it's affordable, and it's accessible. So because of these three things, porn addiction is crack cocaine because people are just going after it again and again because of the dopamine hits that it gives, because of all the ways in which it affects you. It's so easy to get, which is why porn addiction is crack cocaine. Lust is a bit broader than that, right?
Yeah. I just think it's for myself, porn addiction isn't as much of a thing anymore of a struggle, but then instead of turning to porn, I'm just having other thoughts of, other women and that kind of thing. So it's just it almost feels like it just looks or seems better. Mm-hmm. But it's the same problem almost, you know what I mean?
Well, at core, it's the same problem because it's about the disorder of desire. But I think it is better.
Yeah, okay.
It is better. We're all sinful, right? We have sinful inclinations. Some of those behaviors can continue to go down further and further. That leads to more and more destructive kinds of behaviors and destructive on our psyche, destructive on our soul. Will we always have disordered desire? Will we always struggle with that? Yes. But I think there is maturity in recognizing it earlier and not letting it go down the path where it becomes more destructive. Because you're always going to deal with temptation. You're always going to deal with your own weakness. That's natural. That's a regular part of life. It's what you do with it. And so there are worse consequences to just letting yourself give in to that and then give into certain behaviors that lead to other behaviors. I mean, the further down you go, the more destructive it is for yourself and for those around you. And so in a sense, generalized lust we'll always struggle with. Is it as worse as outright porn addiction? No, it's not as worse. Is it as bad as committing adultery? It's not as worse as committing adultery. There are degrees of sin and consequences to that.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, is that also lack of emotional awareness, emotional regulation to doing these things? Like, or is it just like, you're a human, it's as normal as breathing air? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is where you need, mercy and grace on yourself too, to understand like where lust is coming from. Because I would say there definitely are times when your struggles with lust are about not dealing with your emotional life, so to speak, or ways you're trying to escape from difficulty in your life or escape from responsibility in life, and you want to escape into lust. And there's that form. There's another form of lust or lustful thoughts that are just things that just happen out of nowhere, right? A lustful thought just kind of just gets implanted into your mind, right? Martin Luther, famously said, you can't stop birds from flying around your head, meaning like temptation. You can't stop that. Temptation will always come in life, but he said, but you can stop them from building a nest in your hair, right? Mm-hmm. You'll never stop the temptations from coming. And sometimes they just come, but that's different than letting them land on your head, building a whole nest and like letting that happen, right?
Yeah.
And so in that sense, sometimes there are these thoughts that come that are lustful, that, to come, and then you just, don't be too attached to your thoughts. Like, oh, I had that thought. It's just like having a sexual dream. Sometimes there are sexual dreams that you have because you've been cultivating lustful thoughts. Sometimes there's just lustful dreams that come out of nowhere, and it's just like, oh, that was weird, and you just let it go and move on, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't mean anything. But sometimes it does mean something. Sometimes you have cultivated certain things, and other times it just kind of comes and goes. It's, I would say, at times, don't beat yourself up for just having a lustful thought.
Yeah.
It comes, it goes. Don't let the bird build a nest in your hair. At times, there are these lustful thoughts that come that you have to say, maybe this is about deeper things. Yeah. Maybe I have to pay attention to why I'm struggling with this particularly, right?
No, that makes sense. Because like, you could just have a healthier version of pornography addiction or lustful addiction. Because like, you can just watch Netflix. I'm just like, oh, this isn't porn, but it has like beautiful women in there, and I'm like fantasizing this way. Or I know someone who was like, they blocked out all the pornography, social media, but then they had LinkedIn, so they're using LinkedIn pictures. That was their, because like, use anything. It's like the safe version, you know what I mean? And it's like, oh, okay, now I'm okay, but then you're still, in a sense, building that nest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it'll always be a battle. Like if you have wrestled with sexual addiction or like lust, it's very unlikely that you're going to wake up one day and be like, oh, I don't struggle with that anymore. No, I struggle with like anger all the time. It's like, no, you've learned to develop certain things that you tend to gravitate towards to escape or for pleasure. So that'll kind of always kind of be there, right? Mm-hmm. And so you just have to deal with it however it's manifesting in your life, right?
Yeah.
And at different stages of life, it'll look different.
So for you now, it's like you've dealt with this stuff personally, tried to help people with it. You yourself have gotten into places of leadership. What does that look like for you now?
I mean, for me at rock bottom, it means, am I continuing my discipleship to Jesus, which should not be dependent on whether I'm a leader in the church or not. So am I still following God in this area of my life as rigorously as I can? Meaning, do I still have accountability? Am I still confessing my struggles and weaknesses regularly? For me, I've been running support groups for sexual addiction for 15 plus years, and I continue to do it, and I continue to participate in it because I still need it. I came to the conclusion 15, 20 years ago or so that I'm going to need accountability for the rest of my life. I realized like, oh, this is actually, I understand scripture enough that I'm going to struggle with sin for the rest of my life. So if my particular sin manifests in sexual brokenness, I'm going to need something to combat that for the rest of my life. And I've just understood that. And so that means I need regular accountability for the rest of my life. I need to share my struggles on a regular basis with people for the rest of my life. That's my particular journey of having to follow Jesus. That's my particular journey of dying to myself, of crucifying the flesh. That's my particular journey that I have to continue to live out. And I know what that looks like, and that has to look practical right? I can't say, oh yeah, I used to do that, crucifying myself to the flesh, years ago, when it was hard. It's like, no, that journey never ends. And you have to be honest with yourself about that and just get comfortable doing it. I'm just comfortable now, running support groups, being part of support groups, talking about my brokenness, talking about ways in which this manifests. Like, it's just, it shouldn't be this side thing in my life. Like, this is central to my spirituality in many ways. This is how I'm continuing to be honest with God, really.
What would you say your struggle is now that you reach out to your accountability group? Like, this is what I'm struggling with now. Because maybe it's not pornography, but what does it look like now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's honestly not that different than it would have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'm feeling these things, which is leading me to preoccupy about certain things. Maybe I've been exposed to certain things that are triggering certain thoughts in my brain of wanting to escape. Maybe I've kind of gone on the edge of, like you said, looking at stuff that's just, it's not porn, it's not nudity, it's just kind of, beautiful images of women or whatever, like lustful kinds of things, or a news story that I see that I'm just kind of fixating on. And it's like, those things are just constant in our culture, things that you see pop up ads or whatever on your browsers, just, new movies that are out on Netflix that may have nudity or whatever. It's like, those are just constant things, right? That are just, okay, I need to talk about that. I need to acknowledge when that's kind of grabbed a hold of me, when I'm starting to ruminate that, when I'm starting to take that, I'm like, oh, I'm going to save that for later because maybe I'll investigate that later, and be like, okay, I need to acknowledge that and just confess that and say, okay, that's there.
Yeah. So that's what it looks like for you now.
Yeah. It's just that doing that on a regular basis, right? Having that conversation about temptations, struggles, triggers regularly with people, right? Not as an occasional thing, like, oh, once a month I'm sharing my temptation with people. It's like, no, like multiple times a week, having these conversations with people, texting in group chats saying, hey, this is kind of what's happening for me, or hey, I stumbled upon this today and I can't get it out of my mind. Just confessing to you guys, right? Yeah. Hey, I'm going to be vulnerable today. I didn't get a good sleep and I'm going to have hours to myself tonight. Just keep in touch so that I don't do anything stupid, like that sort of thing regularly.
What's regularly for you? Like daily, weekly?
Definitely weekly, like probably multiple times a week, having these kinds of chats with me. And it's me acknowledging some of my own weakness. It's having other people acknowledge their weakness and me responding to them, and just having, it probably doesn't go 2 days without having some kind of exchange with somebody.
How do you respond to people when they say, hey, I'm going to, does it be some crazy, like, oh, I'm going to pray for you and here's a paragraph of scripture I'm going to send, or?
At times, when people reach out to me saying that they're struggling, it depends. I mean, sometimes I'll just say, hey, thanks for letting me know. Yeah. Because I know that one of the biggest things that helps me in accountability is not so much that somebody tells me like great wisdom, but it's the fact that they're hearing my message. Yeah. The fact that I'm reaching out and saying, hey, I'm struggling, that's really important for me. It's not so much that they're just going to download all this wisdom that's going to help me. It's knowing that there's somebody I can connect with and be honest with. And so when people reach out to me, I'll often just, oftentimes I'll just say, hey, thanks, man. Like, let me know if there's any way I can pray for you. Sometimes depending on how much they're struggling, like sometimes I'll give some advice and say like, hey, is there anything you can kind of do today, that'll keep you healthy? Right? If somebody texts me, like recently somebody was like, I'm going to have a hard day at work and I know I'm going to be tempted to like escape online to like something lustful. And so I'll say, hey, are there things you can do today to take good breaks? Like, let me know what you do to take some time off. So like go for a walk and let me know, or spend some time in quiet. Let me know. At times I'll actually reach out and say, hey, maybe we, want to chat for a bit today. Like just to have like 10 minutes of conversation on the phone, pray for each other. Sometimes, and so it varies in terms of how I respond to people, depending on what kind of a difficult situation they're in. Generally it's just being a good listening ear, and most of us, we don't want somebody to, tell us, oh, just do this and you'll be fine. Like I'll never say that. Like, hey man, you just need to pray. Like, what's wrong with you? Like that's not what you want to say. because I know that that's not helpful for me. It's compassionate listening. It's, people encouraging you, affirming you. Some of the most encouraging things I think that I see in some of my text groups is just people like reminding each other like of who God is, reminding each other like, the love that we have for each other, affirming each other, reminding people like who they are. Those kinds of things are helpful in the battle.
I've been in quite a few accountability groups now because I've been trying to help some dudes, and I find it very rare that people reach out when they're tempted or when they are aware that they'll struggle. It's very hard and rare. Like maybe some people have done it once or twice with me. I don't know, how do I cultivate, or how does that culture get cultivated?
I mean, honestly, it's so hard to cultivate. It's so hard for people to learn to reach out to one another before they act up.
Yeah.
In the midst of their struggle. And for me, I just try to model it to people as much as possible. I'll model it for people. I will assume that they need support. I mean, I'll reach out to guys and say like, hey, how's the struggle going? Because I haven't heard from them for weeks. And I know that this doesn't just go away. So I know they're probably struggling, even though they haven't said anything. And so again, for me, it's I know the level to which I need to do this for my own health. And so I'm assuming the same for other people. And in general, that's proven to be true. Like,
and then how many, you said you've led so many groups. How do you reach out to like multiple groups?
No, I've led so many groups, and I mean, I have my own kind of smaller group that I do accountability with as I lead kind of other groups and teach other people. And that kind of, in who I do accountability with, morphs that time kind of over the years. And so I try to teach people that. I mean, honestly, like you said, that's probably the biggest lesson that people just aren't able to learn or to get comfortable with, is to continue to acknowledge their weakness. So accountability groups, I know of so many that just die off.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, let's do accountability. And then, they begin very excited and, oh, let's do that. Let's be honest with each other. That's great. But then human nature takes over, and it's like, oh, I don't want to share my weakness. Like, that person hasn't shared. They're going to think there's something wrong with me, that I'm struggling. Right. And then each person's thinking the same thing, and then nobody reaches out anymore. And then all of a sudden accountability becomes ineffective.
Yeah. And
it's like, okay, somebody's just got to realize, or people need to realize, we're all in the same boat. We all struggle on a regular basis, daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. Let's be honest and reach out to each other. But I think it's human nature. We don't want to acknowledge our weakness. We think we could do it on our own. We come up with all these excuses like, oh, I don't want to bother them, or they haven't reached out to me for a while, so I feel weird reaching out to them. It's like, come on, just get over yourself. Like, just reach out. Again, for me, so I just take that approach. Like, I can't force anybody to do it, but I want to model for you. For me, this is what health requires. So I want to model for you, this is what health looks like, right? If you want health, it's kind of like Paul says, like, I think in a healthy way, like, do as I do, right? And for me, it's like, I'm still in this, but I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and I feel like God's done so much in my life, but I still need to do this very nitty gritty, everyday kind of work.
Right.
Don't expect it to be any different for you. It's kind of my attitude.
Yeah. The narrative now, I feel like with the church in terms of pornography addiction, is always like, it is wrong. It is bad. Here's some stats.
Yeah.
This is how big the problem is.
Yeah.
And you need to not do this anymore.
Yeah.
And because it's so bad, you'll probably not do it anymore. But it doesn't work, right?
It doesn't work. Moralizing to stop this behavior is just not a long-term solution. I was just telling people this is so wrong. That's somehow going to stop them. It's not enough, because you have to get to the deeper desires behind sexual brokenness, which is really the desire for good things. It's actually the desire at core. There's a desire for transcendence, the desire for beauty, the desire for goodness, the desire for joy and intimacy. And if you're just telling people, just stop this, this is so bad, you're not allowing the deeper questions or the deeper roots to come to fruition, which is, well, what about my desire for beauty? What about my desire for ecstasy, for intimacy? Right? And we need to actually help to cultivate and flourish that, not just no to these bad expressions. What we really need to help people do is flourish in some of the deep longings that they do have. Because at core, your sexual brokenness in many ways is a desire for very good things, just in a distorted way. So instead of just telling people, stop, it's, okay, yes, stop this, but do this. Yes, stop this, but give yourself over to this, which is very good, and it's very fulfilling, and it's very beautiful. It's very difficult, but there is somewhere to go with your desires. Instead of just saying no to desire. And we definitely don't hear that message enough.
What would be like some first steps for churches to help implement some of these things towards sexual brokenness? How can they go about doing something to address this?
Yeah, first steps would be just beginning to address it from the pulpit. Not that pulpit teaching is a long-term solution to like helping people, but it does signal to the church that this is okay to talk about. And so talking about issues of sexual brokenness from the pulpit, having people share, even outside speakers to come, just helps to kind of say like, hey, we want to be a church that talks about this, which is huge, right? Yeah. So oftentimes that'll be enough for somebody in the congregation to go to their pastor and say, hey, I struggle with this, or I appreciate that you even want to acknowledge this, which means that's safe enough for me. So at least begins to shift the culture. I'd also say like, find those people who are already dealing with this and encourage them, affirm them, empower them. There's definitely people who have been trying to deal with this in their life and probably have some kind of movement forward in their life. Find those people, encourage them, train, help them to find more training, right? Like really encourage them to continue doing this kind of work. That'd probably be the biggest thing. Like start small. Like don't feel like, oh, I'm going to have this massive program now that's going to like funnel people into addressing their sexual brokenness. Like, no, that's probably not going to work. There's probably pockets of guys who are probably already talking about this. Mm-hmm. Get to know them, help them to get more resources into their life. Like, hey, you should start a group. Like maybe I can help you get connected with a group, or is there some kind of training you can get, or is there, some kind of resource out there that you can just, and get behind them, right? Empower them to be able to do that work better. Because my guess is it's probably not going to grow to become a huge thing in your church, but at least there's a landing place. And so find those people, encourage them, bless them, empower them, resource them, so that at least there's some place in the church where that conversation is happening. Yeah.
Do you know any videos or books that you would recommend for people in these areas?
That's always tough. I mean, there's a lot of good resources out there. Like, there's a bunch of books recently over the last bunch of years that I would, definitely recommend, like Surfing for God, John Cusick. That's an excellent book. He's got a study guide that you can easily find online. That's an easy way. Like, hey, here's this book. Get a few guys together, read a chapter every week, discuss the discussion questions, right? Like learn that way, grow that way, learn to have honest conversations through a tool like that. Unwanted is another book a few years ago that came out.
Who writes that one? Do you know?
Unwanted. I can see the cover. Jay Stringer is the name of the author. Another really good book that helps to look at some of the deeper issues involved in dealing with pornography addiction. Mm-hmm. So there are these books, and there's so many out there now, books that help to understand and unpack sexual brokenness. And so even just getting a group of people together who are willing to do that book study together, start to share, start to just pray for each other. I mean, that's really like, it's not rocket science to kind of do that, right? But finding the people who are willing to do that and doing something like that, that would be kind of my recommendation, or an easy way for people to just begin to have that dialogue.
Yeah. I remember when I was growing up, there was a book, Every Man's Battle. Did you read that one?
I remember that one. Yeah, Every Man's Battle.
What did you think about that one?
From what I remember, it had like a few helpful kind of tools. Like I remember something like bounce your eyes or something, like you see something bounce, and like these kinds of things, which like are helpful.
Not long term though, I felt.
Not long term, probably didn't address the complexity of sexual brokenness.
Yeah.
And so, there's a place for all kinds of things, right? Like when I was beginning, I needed, something simple. And then as time went on, I was like, okay, I need a bit more than that. And then it's like, oh, okay, like, wow, these have deeper roots than that. I need to go a bit deeper. And so, there's all kinds of levels of reflecting on this topic and understanding. But again, there's a few of these books that right from the get-go, they give you a good nuanced understanding of sexual brokenness and pornography addiction. So like I mentioned that book, Surfing for God, like that'll just give you a really good broad perspective of all the different kinds of issues that are involved, right? And that's just helpful so that you have a realistic understanding of what's involved in terms of sexual brokenness and then sexual healing.
Yeah. No, that's so cool, because I think like oftentimes dealing with this stuff, you need to find strength and be stronger to get through it. But then what I'm hearing now from you and through a lot of these other resources, like it's more about admitting weakness than it is about finding strength and being stronger to get through it.
Like probably the vision of what maturity in this area looks like is maturity means I am comfortable in my weakness. I'm okay being needy, limited, dependent on others. If you can embrace that, that will lead you to maturity and wholeness. Not, I think we tend to think about this within the church, like, oh, you're struggling with sexual things. I'm going to pray for you so that you're going to be strong and that you can just stay faithful to the Lord. And I think what we're sometimes think that means is on my own, I can feel good and confident that I can stand up to temptation. And it's like, actually, that's the wrong vision. Maturity, long-term maturity what it should look like is I'm somebody who's aware of how weak I am. So I'm willing to reach out to God openly. I'm going to pursue God deeply because I know I don't have strength. And I'm actually going to rely on people, and share my struggles with them because I know I need people. And if you are grounded in that, and if you're like, I'm okay there, you're probably going to stay healthy. That's the goal, is I'm acknowledging my weakness, my limitation, my need for others. That's what it means to be mature.
Thank you. Well, that's so good. But so hard.
That's so good, but so hard. But it's attainable. When we talk about this, it's attainable, right? We just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to humble myself. I don't want to change my lifestyle. It's like, well, I don't know what else I can offer you, man. Like, but that's what the vision is attainable for everybody.
Yeah.
Learn to rely on people. Learn to be weak. Accept your weakness. Not even learn. Accept your weakness because you are weak.
Well, I think we touched on a lot of different things, and hopefully went in depth. Good. I think there's definitely we could have gone a lot deeper on some of the things, but I think
I can probably talk about this for days on end.
Yeah. But I think this is a good start, and hopefully this would be helpful to others listening. And but thank you for coming and sharing, and also just helping all the different people that you have helped and address this, and helping churches and leaders as well. Hopefully in the future things will become more open and vulnerable, and people will be able to address these things, and churches will be able to address these things, and it wouldn't be such a burden on people so that they are not pursuing their relationship with Jesus. I feel like there's so many people that feel like they're terrible so that they can't pursue God, or they can't serve, or all these things. or they have to keep it secret and all this kinds of things. So hopefully this shines a light in some of the darkness. But once again, thank you for being my first guest on the Honest to God pod.
I didn't know this was the first time. Okay. All right.
No,
Sweet.
but yeah, thanks again. So that was great.
Okay.